What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in with This Week at Bungie, where finally we get a bit of conversation about weapons, and Bungie break down a whole bunch of changes that they're looking at for the future, some of which we'll see in the middle of this season, and that includes buffs for auto rifles and trace rifles, various fixes including re-enabling exotics, and bug fixes for the Duality dungeon, which is certainly positive, but beyond that, they talk about some weapon changes that they have planned for Season 19, and even touch on a few things that we'll see in Lightfall, plus wider plans and thoughts on various different weapons questions. So we'll talk about that and an update on the recent ban wave where a lot of players have been banned from D2. And so we'll do our best to cover it all in the video. As always, I hope you guys find this one useful, but without further delay, let's get into it. And so starting out today, we have a couple of updates from Bungie that quite a few players will want to know about. So initially, Bungie Help outlined that they've got a fix for the Gaia Falcon's Hallberg Hunter exotic identified, and currently it's scheduled to be shipped out in mid-October. It's been disabled since September 15th, so we won't have been able to use it for a month by the time it gets fixed. But the big positive is that Bungie have given us that communication with an actual date that they're targeting to get that sorted. So that's the first thing, and it looks like we're going to be seeing a kind of mid-October update alongside Festival of the Lost. Bungie are referring to it as the mid-season update. And with a lot of conversation about the bugs in the Duality dungeon, another positive is that Bungie Help said the team has configured a potential fix for an issue where players can inadvertently die after ringing the Bell of Conquest in the Duality dungeon. We're targeting our October 18th patch to release it, and we'll provide further updates when available. And so hopefully that's going to improve the Duality experience. It's pretty frustrating being randomly killed in any game mode, but especially with players trying to do flawless and solo clears, that one is particularly annoying. And so hopefully when that drops alongside the Festival of the Lost once again, if we're lucky, we'll see a few other updates and positive changes at the same time. Now though, let's get into the main body of the TWAB this week. Initially, there is a pretty big section on weapons and some changes they have planned for the future, and various folks from the weapon team jump in, and they do this in a kind of Q&A format. So diving straight in, the first question is, when the full auto setting arrives for all weapons, are you still going to keep the full auto trigger system mod as an option? It's kind of nice to have the flexibility without making every weapon full auto, and they say yes, there are no plans to remove it, the full auto trigger system mod isn't going away. The next question on the same subject is, what will replace the full auto trigger system on exotics that have it as a perk when the new accessibility feature goes live? And the response is that they don't want to inadvertently make these stronger in PvP, so the goal here was to replace full auto with something fun and thematic, but more useful in PvE than PvP. And so for some examples, for Traveler's Chosen, they've replaced the full auto trigger system in the Catalyst with Surplus, and for Vigilance Wing they'll replace it with Ensemble. Then for No Time to Explain, they'll replace the full auto trigger system with Feeding Frenzy. And then they get on to Divinity, and they say note that encounters are built around players having access to being able to weaken, as many folks have theorized. We don't believe that Divinity in its current form is actually a balanced problem. It's not necessarily too strong in isolation. That said, Divinity is incredibly dominant in endgame PvE because it trivializes aiming precision weapons and has an extremely high uptime for weaken. The most important issue is that Divinity granting 30% weaken sucks the air out of the room for all other weaken sources, such as Tether or Tractor Cannon, and we don't want to power creep past Divinity to make them interesting. With this in mind, we've been looking at Divinity for a while and have tested a variety of changes in Season 19, landing on reducing Divinity's weaken from 30% to 15%. And so Divinity is getting a bit of a nerf right there. It won't fundamentally change the behavior of the weapon, but obviously is going to reduce that weaken benefit. So give us your thoughts about that. And for kinetic weapons in PvE, they say they're looking at the damage type as opposed to the slot, and a few changes that they're planning for post-Lightfall to make this a more interesting aspect of how weapons feel. So some upcoming changes to the kinetic damage type is certainly interesting. And then they say, what about adept raid weapon viability? As it stands, crafted base raid weapons are flat out better than adept weapons. We're not happy with this current state and have changes coming in Lightfall that give the new Lightfall raid adept weapons access to enhanced perks. But they say this won't come in the form of full freeform crafting. It's a little complex, so please look out for more information to come when we're closer to Lightfall's release. That's interesting, adept perks on raid weapons dropping potentially randomly or through the crafting system on adept variants after Lightfall. Next, though, they talk about future plans for exotic champion weapons, and they say we don't have specific plans to add anti-champion mechanics to existing exotics. That said, we are building anti-champion functionality into a new exotic weapon in Season 19, and may revisit other weapons later if we see a need. So a bit of a tease right there. And they also say that starting in Season 19, we'll see a small number of non-raid weapons get access to perks from older raids. So maybe some of the perks from things like Deepstone Crypt. And here are a few questions about stacks and perks. Initially, do stability perks such as Rapid Hit affect Perfect Draw on bows? And Bungie say yes, anything that affects the stability stat on a bow will affect the Perfect Draw window. But also we have another question, why does only a subset of exotic weapons tie into subclass 3.0? And they say we're not planning to tie every exotic into 3.0 verbs, but over time we'll add functionality to several of them, starting with those that are strongly themed around damage types. And we're currently looking at Seasons 20 and 21 for passes on this, but don't have any more specific info at the moment. They next say that they're investigating the possibility of putting multiple perks into each column on a crafted weapon at some point in the future, but they add it's a complicated task and there won't be anything in the immediate future, but they'll continue looking deeper into it. The next question is, I've heard that you're reworking 20 exotic weapons in Season 19. Why so many? And to clarify, we said we're touching 20 exotics with both buffs and nerfs, but the extent of that varies quite a bit. From a substantial rework, like Lord of Wolves, to a small but impactful change like Legend of Acreus, there's a lot to cover, both big and small. There's a question here as well about Adagio and why it's different on so many weapons. And they say Adagio is actually only branched 2 ways, specifically to prevent it from being too strong on bows. So bows and shotguns are plus 20% damage, and everything else gets plus 30% damage. Then for Rangefinder, they say, we'll be removing the added aim assist fall-off in the mid-season balance pass. The perk is ridiculously strong with just the zoom bonus, and it doesn't need to increase aim assist fall-off in addition to that. On top of that, they say they'll fix the Fate of All Fools perk on the Jade Rabbit, and the plan is to change it so that rapidly chaining precision hits will make your next body shot deal the same damage as a crit, and you'll be able to store up to 3 increased damage body shots at a time. That'll certainly be an interesting change. And in terms of balance changes we should be looking forward to in the mid-season balance pass, that's something we're going to get this season. They say there'll be a sizable stability bump for auto rifles and trace rifles, a small buff to critical hit damage on adaptive frame pulse rifles and precision frame auto rifles, and then they've slightly reduced the effective range of pulse rifles at low to mid stat values. There'll also be nerfs to Jade Rabbit and No Time to Explain's ease of use, a continuation of the Lord of Wolves rework, plus a small rocket launcher blast radius buff. And then we'll see a glaive damage resistance nerf, a sidearm aim assist fall off buff, a rework to sniper flinch, some very small tweaks to submachine guns that are outperforming their intended ranges, as well as a small decrease to high impact scout rifle damage. And they say some outliers that have high zoom levels outside of normal parameters are being brought back in line. Plus Risk Runner will see a PvP arc damage resistance reduction. And then in Season 19, they have an additional list of changes they'll be making, including removing some shotgun randomness, improving hit detection for glaives, and reworking or changing nearly 20 weapon perks, as well as reworking and changing over 20 exotic weapons. So quite a few things coming up in the next few weeks, and couple of seasons as Bungie have outlined. There are even more questions though, and they say initially they're not going to nerf under pressure on fusion rifles, but the most likely thing they'll do if main ingredient usage doesn't come down naturally is lower its stats, which will allow us to avoid hitting all precision frame fusions and give other weapons in the subfamily room to breathe. On top of this, for Headseeker, they say the plan is to increase the duration that the perk is active and have the perk reset on body shots when it's already active, and then have it increase aim assist by a very small amount. And they say in playtests right now, arguably it's one of the best neutral perks for pulse rifles. And so some really interesting insights right there. It's good to get a bit more conversation about weapons, as well as previews to specific changes and when we're going to see them. So as always, give us your thoughts below. And here they give a quick update from the security team about account bans, and they say, before getting into explanations, we apologize to impacted players up front. Our job is to protect our players, and our team unfortunately did the opposite this past week, and when mistakes are made, transparency is important. During the development of one of our cheater detections, a combination of requirements was set for banning a particular class of cheaters. We utilize specific signatures that those types of players generate, and early last week we started seeing an increase in appeals and began investigating. Once we identified the problem with the signature, we immediately unbanned anyone who we could identify as impacted, and began reviewing recent security actions with a fine-tooth comb, as well as continuing to unban based on a review of appeals. But they add that there's a lot of misinformation being passed around regarding why a person may be banned. In instances where unbans happen, players who are knowingly cheating insert themselves into these conversations to try and get their own bans overturned. And they point out that any players affected should use the ban appeal process, which is linked in the TWAB below. Those are the main impactful bits of the TWAB this week, guys. And again, a lot of changes spread out across the course of this season, Season 19 and Lightfall, that will apply to weapons. So give us your thoughts about those down in the comment section, any standouts that you can think of. And if you've enjoyed the video today, a rating below really helps us out. Plus, be sure to get subscribed for more Destiny content. But otherwise, I'll catch you guys very soon.